Chapters 1 through 5 of the First Book of the Kings, from the Holy Bible in Modern English, translated by Ferrar Fenton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mark Penfold. Chapter 1. But King David grew old and advanced in years, and they covered him with clothing, but he felt no warmth. So his officers said to him, "Let us seek for your majesty a young maiden, and let her attend the king, and be a nurse and lie at your breast, and warm your majesty." They therefore sought for the fairest girl in all the bounds of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The girl was very beautiful, and she was nurse to the king and attended to him, but the king never married her. Then Adoniah, the son of Haggith, raised himself, saying, "I will be king." So he prepared a carriage and horses, and 50 men to run before him, for his father never restrained him at any time by asking, "What are you doing?" He was very handsome, and he was born next after Absalom. He also made an agreement with Joab ben Zeruiah and Abiathar the priest, and they helped Adoniah forward. But Zadok the priest, and Benaiah ben Joiada, and Nathan the reciter, and Shimei, and Rei, and the heroes who were with David, were not with Adoniah. Adoniah, however, sacrificed sheep and oxen and fat calves at Aben-Zakleph, which is near Ain Rogel, and he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the nobles of Judah in the king's service. He did not, however, invite Nathan the reciter, and Benaiah, and the heroes, or Solomon his brother. Nathan therefore spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Have you heard that Adoniah the son of Haggith reigns, and our master David does not know it? So now go, reflect with yourself, and protect your own life and the life of your son Solomon. Go and proceed to King David, and say to him, Did not your majesty promise to your handmaid that Solomon your son shall reign after me and sit upon my throne? Then why is Adoniah reigning? Then, whilst you are speaking thus with the king, I will come after you, and confirm your statement." Bathsheba consequently went to the king in his chamber. The king, however, was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was attending on the king, when Bathsheba approached and bowed to the king. And the king asked, "What is the matter?" And she replied to him, "Did not my prince swear to your handmaid by your ever-living God, that Solomon your son shall reign after me and sit upon my throne? But now, see, Adoniah reigns, and your majesty does not know it. And he is sacrificing oxen and fat calves and sheep in plenty, and has invited all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army, but he has not invited your servant Solomon. And now, your majesty, the eyes of all Israel are upon you, to inform them who shall sit upon the throne of your majesty after you. Because when your majesty lies down with your fathers, I and Solomon your son will be offensive." And then, whilst she was talking to the king, Nathan the reciter came, and they reported to the king, saying, "Nathan the reciter is here." And he came before the king, and bowed to the king with his face earthwards. Then Nathan asked, "Has your majesty commanded, Adoniah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down today, and is sacrificing oxen, and fat calves, and sheep in plenty, and has invited all the king's sons, and the commanders of the army, and Abiathar the priest, and they are eating and drinking before him, and they cry, Adoniah is king. But for me, your servant, and for Zadok the priest, and for Benaiah ben Joiada, and for your servant Solomon, there is no invitation. But perhaps this affair is from your majesty, only you have not informed your servants who shall sit on your majesty's throne after you." Then the king answered, "Let them call Bathsheba to me." So she came to the king's presence, and stood before the king, when the king swore and said, "By the life of the ever-living, who delivered me from all my troubles, exactly as I promised you, by the ever-living God of Israel, saying, that Solomon your son should reign after me, and shall sit on my throne in my place, I will do it today." Bathsheba consequently bent with her face earthward, and bowed to the king, and said, "May my prince, King David, live forever." Next King David said, "Fetch to me Zadok the priest, and Nathan the reciter, and Benaiah ben Jehoiada." And they came to the royal presence, when the king said to them, "Take with you the officers of your prince, and let them mount Solomon on my own horse, and go down with him to Gihon, and there let Zadok the priest and Nathan the reciter consecrate him king over Israel, and sound a trumpet, and say, 'Long live King Solomon.' Then proceed with him, and bring him, and set him on my throne, and he shall be my deputy vice-king, and I will instruct him in his administration over Israel and Judah." Benaiah ben Jehoiada then answered the king and said, "Certainly, for the ever-living God of your majesty says it. As the ever-living has been with your majesty, so may he be with Solomon, and extend his throne more than your majesty David's." Zadok the priest, and Nathan the reciter, and Benaiah ben Jehoiada, with the guards and couriers, accordingly went down and mounted Solomon on the horse of King David, and marched with him to Gihon, where Zadok the priest took a horn of oil from the hall, and consecrated Solomon, and sounded a trumpet, and all the forces cried, "Long live King Solomon!" The whole of the forces also followed after him, playing their bands, and cheering loudly, and shaking the earth with their voices. And Adoniah and all his guests who were with him heard it, as they were all at dinner. Joab also heard the sound of the trumpet, and asked, "What is that roaring sound?" Whilst he was still speaking, Jehonathan ben Abiathar the priest came, and Adoniah said to him, "Come, for you are a powerful man, and one of good luck." But Jehonathan replied to Adoniah and said, "I am unlucky to our prince. King David has made Solomon king, and the king has sent with him Zadok the priest, and Nathan the reciter, and Benaiah ben Jehoiada, and the guards and couriers, and they have mounted him on the king's horse. And Zadok the priest and Nathan the reciter have consecrated him king at Gihon, and have gone up from there cheering, and that sudden roar which you have heard is the sound of them. They have also seated Solomon on the throne of his kingdom. And the ministers of King David have also come to thank our King David, saying, 'May it please your God to make the name of Solomon more than your name, and may he extend his throne more than he extended yours.' And they have bowed to the king who was on his couch, when the king answered thus, 'Thank the ever-living God of Israel, who has granted to set him today on my throne, and my eyes to see it.'" Then all the guests of Adoniah were terrified, and arose, and every one went to his carriage. Adoniah also was afraid of the appearance of Solomon, and arose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar. But it was reported to Solomon, "See, Adoniah is afraid of King Solomon, so he has seized the horns of the altar, exclaiming, 'Let King Solomon swear to me today that he will not kill his servant with the sword.'" But Solomon answered, "If the ever-living acquits him, not a hair of his shall fall to the earth. But if he is found to be criminal, he shall die." Then King Solomon arrested, and had him brought down from the altar. So he came and bowed to Solomon the king. And Solomon said to him, "Go to your house." Chapter 2. The time of David's death, however, approached, and he sent for Solomon his son, and said, "I am going the way of all the earth. Therefore be brave yourself, and be a man, and guard the trust of your ever-living God, and walk in his ways by guarding his institutions, and commandments, and legislation, and constitution, as they are recorded in the laws of Moses. For you should reflect upon all you do, and all you find there, so that the ever-living may establish the promise which he made to me, saying, 'If your children keep my path, and walk before me in truth with all their hearts and all their souls, there shall not be wanting a man from you upon the throne of Israel.' You, however, know what Joab ben Zeruiah did to me, when I appointed 2 commanders to the armies of Israel, Abner ben Ner, and Amasa ben Jether, whom he murdered, and shed the blood of war in peace, and fixed the blood of war in his girdle that was round his waist, and on his shoes upon his feet. Therefore do to him as your skill dictates, and let not his gray hairs go down to the grave in peace. To the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, act kindly, and let them be guests at your table, for they entertained me when I fled from Absalom your brother. And there is with you Shammai ben Gera, the Benjaminite of Bachurim, who cursed me with foul curses at the time when I went to Bachurim. But as he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I promised him by the ever-living that I would not kill him by the sword. You, however, do not pardon him, for you are a wise man, and will know how to act with him. So bring his gray hairs with blood to the grave. David afterwards lay down with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. And the period that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned in Hebron 7 years, and reigned in Jerusalem 33 years. Thus Solomon mounted the throne of his father, and greatly strengthened his kingdom. Then Adoniah the son of Chagith came to Bathsheba the mother of Solomon, and she asked, "Does peace come with you?" And he answered, "Peace," and continued, "May I speak to you?" When she answered, "Speak." And he said, "You know that the kingship was mine, and all Israel placed me before them as king. But you diverted the kingship and brought it to my brother, so that it was his from the ever-living. But, however, I will ask one request from you. Do not turn your face from me." So she replied, "Speak." When he said, "Speak for me now to Solomon the king, for he will not refuse you, and ask him to give me Abishag the Shunammite for a wife." And Bathsheba replied, "Well, I will speak for you to the king." So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him about Adoniah. And the king arose to meet her, and bowed to her, and then sat on his throne. And they placed a cushion for the mother of the king, and she sat at his right hand, and said, "I would ask one little request from you. Do not refuse it." Then she continued, "Will you give Abishag the Shunammite to Adoniah for a wife?" But King Solomon replied and said to his mother, "But why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adoniah? Ask the kingship for him, for he is my elder brother, and for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah." Then King Solomon swore by the ever-living, saying, "May God do so to me, and more than that, if Adoniah has not spoken this speech for his life. So now by the life of the ever-living who formed me, and placed me upon the throne of David my father, and who made a house for me, Adoniah shall die today." Then King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah ben Jehoiada, who struck him, and he died. And he ordered Abiathar the priest, "Go to Anathoth your estate, for you are a dead man. But I will not kill you today, because you served the altar of the high Lord before David my father, and because you suffered in all my father suffered." Solomon also expelled Abiathar from being priest to the ever-living, thus fulfilling the word of the ever-living which he spoke about the house of Eli at Shiloh. When the report of this came to Joab, for Joab had inclined after Adoniah, although he had not inclined after Absalom, he fled to the hall of the ever-living, and seized the horns of the altar. But it was reported to King Solomon that Joab had fled to the hall of the ever-living, and that he was at the side of the altar. So the king sent Benaiah ben Jehoiada, saying, "Go, execute him." Benaiah accordingly went to the hall of the ever-living, and said to him, "The king orders you to come." But he replied, "No, for I shall be killed." Benaiah consequently returned the king word, saying, "Joab says thus, and by it I am prevented." But the king replied to him, Do as I have ordered, and execute him, and bury him, and take away the innocent blood Joab shed from off me and from off my father's house. For the ever-living will return his blood on his head, who murdered the 2 good men who were better than himself, and murdered them with the sword. But my father David knew it not. Abner the son of Ner, the commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa ben Jether, commander of the army of Judah, and the blood of both of them is on the head of Joab and the head of his race forever. But to David and his race, and house and throne, may there be peace forever from the ever-living. Benaiah ben Jehoiada consequently went and struck and killed and buried him at his home in the pastures. And the king appointed Benaiah ben Jehoiada to be over the army instead of him. The king also appointed Zadok as priest in place of Abiathar. Then the king sent and summoned Shimei, and said to him, Build yourself a house in Jerusalem, and reside there, and do not go out from there whatever happens. For it shall be that on the day you go out, and pass the brook of Kedron, be certain that you shall die. Your blood will be on your own head. And Shimei replied to the king, What you have said is good, your majesty. Your servant will do it. And Shimei resided in Jerusalem some years. But at the end of 3 years, 2 of his slaves ran away from Shimei to Achish, the son of Maacah, who had been king of Gath, and it was reported to Shimei, saying, Your slaves are at Gath. Shimei therefore arose and saddled his ass and went to Achish at Gath to seek his slaves, and brought his slaves from Gath. But it was reported to Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and returned. The king consequently sent to summon Shimei, and asked him, Did I not swear to you by the ever-living, and declare, and say that in the day you went away and journeyed for any cause whatever, you should die? And you replied, The thing you have threatened me is good. Then why have you not attended to the oath by the ever-living, and the order as I ordered you? And the king continued to Shimei, You know all the wrong which your heart desired should be done to David my father, but the ever-living has turned that on your own head. And may King Solomon be blessed, and the throne of David be established before the ever-living forever. Then the king ordered Benaiah ben Jehoiada, and he went and assailed him, and he died. Thus the kingship was secured to the hand of Solomon. Chapter 3. Solomon afterwards contracted a treaty of marriage with Pharaoh, king of the Mitzrayim, and married Pharaoh's daughter, and brought her to the city of David, until he completed the building of his palace, and the house of the ever-living, and the walls around Jerusalem. For the people had altars on the hills, because a house had not been built to the name of the ever-living until these times. And Solomon loved the ever-living, walking in all the institutions of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense on the hills. So the king went to Gibeon, where there was a great peak, to sacrifice 1,000 burnt offerings. Solomon offered them on that peak. At Gibeon the ever-living appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, when God said, Ask what I shall give you. And Solomon replied, You showed kindness to my father David, your servant, because he walked before you in sincerity and rectitude and right-heartedness, and you kept this great kindness for him by granting to him that his son should sit upon his throne. He does today. Now also, my ever-living God, you have made your servant reign in place of David my father, but I am very young. I may not know how to conduct myself. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a numerous people who cannot be numbered or counted for extent. Then give your servant a heart to listen justly to your people, and to distinguish between right or wrong. For who is able to administer justice to this splendid people of yours? And it was acceptable in the sight of the ever-living that Solomon asked such a thing. God therefore said to him, Because you have asked this thing, and not asked for yourself length of days, and have not asked wealth for yourself, and have not asked the lives of your enemies, but have asked intelligence for yourself, to listen to justice, I will do for you as you request. I will give you a wise heart and understanding, such as there has not been before you, and such as will not arise after you. And also I will give you what you have not asked, that is, wealth and splendor such as no man of the kings of all your time possesses. And if you walk in my paths, to guard my institutions and commands as your father David walked, I will lengthen your days." Then Solomon awoke, and it was a dream. So he went to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of the ever-living, and offered sacrifices and thank offerings and drink offerings with all his ministers. Once there came 2 women, harlots, to the king, and appealed to him. And the first woman said, "Your Majesty, myself and this woman lived in a single house, and I bore a child there in the house. But 3 days after I had borne it, this woman also bore a child, and we were alone, and there was no outsider with us in the house, none except us 2 in the house. But the son of this woman died at night, as she overlaid it. Then she arose in the middle of the night, and took my son from my side, while your servant slept, and laid it to her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I arose in the morning to suckle my child, then I saw a corpse, and having examined it in the morning, I saw that it was not my child which I had borne." Then the other woman said, "No, for my child is the living, but yours is the dead." But the first replied, "Nay, for your child is the dead, and my child is the living, and you shall answer for it before the king." The king consequently said, "One asserts, my child is the living, and yours is the dead. And the other asserts, no, for your child is the dead, and my child is the living." The king therefore continued, "Fetch me a sword." And they brought a sword to the king. When the king said, "Split the living child into 2, and give half to the one, and half to the other." The woman, however, whose the living child was, replied to the king, for her affection quivered over her child, and exclaimed, "My lord, give the living child to her instead of the dead. Do not kill it, and thus you will preserve it for me and for her. It shall not be split." Upon which the king replied, "Give her the living child, and kill it not. She is its mother." And all Israel heard of this judgment that the king had delivered, and they paid him respect, for they saw that divine wisdom was in his breast to do justice. Chapter 4. Thus Solomon became king over all Israel. And these were his princes: Azariah ben Zadok the priest, Alikarath and Achiah sons of Shisha were chancellors. Joshaphat ben Achiud was the recorder, and Benaiah ben Jehoiada was over the army, and Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Azariah ben Nathan was superintendent of the governors, and Zebud ben Nathan superintendent of the royal farms, and Achishur was superintendent of the palace, and Adoniram ben Abda superintendent of the taxes. Solomon also had 12 governors over all Israel, who also sustained the king and his family, each a month in a year. They were to equalize the expenses, and these were their names: Ben-Kor in Mount Ephraim, Ben-Dakar in Makaz and Shalbim, and Beth-Shemesh, and the oak wood of Beth-Canaan; Ben-Kesed in Arboth, with Soka, and all the district of Kaphir; Ben-Abinadab over all Naphoth-Dor; Taphath, the daughter of Solomon, was his wife. To Anna ben Achilud were Phanak and Megiddo, and all Beth-Shan to Abel-Macholah, as far as the ford of Jechamam. Ben-Gabar was at Ramoth-Gilead. He had the villages of Ben-Manasseh, that are in Gilad, with the district of Argob, that lies in Bashan, 60 great walled cities with walls and brass gates. Achinadab ben Ada was at Machanim. Achimatz in Naphtali. He also married as his wife Basmath, the daughter of Solomon. Bana ben Koshai in Asher and Baloth. Joshaphat ben Paruah in Issachar. Shimei ben Allah in Benjamin. Gabar ben Arai in the land of Gilad, the district of Sihon, king of the Amorite, and Og, king of Bashan, which district was a single government. And Judah and Israel increased like the sand which is by the sea, with plenty to eat and drink and enjoy. Chapter 5. Solomon was also emperor of all the kingdoms from the river, to the country of the Philistine, and to the border of the Mitzrayim, and they lay under tribute and service to Solomon all the time of his life. And the provision for Solomon for a single day was 30 cors of fine flour, and 60 cors of meal, 10 fat bullocks, and 20 grazed bullocks, and 100 sheep, beside goats, and venison, and fat poultry. For he also ruled over all beyond the river, from Thifsah to Azah, in all the kingdoms beyond the river. And he kept peace for all his subjects around. And Judah and Israel lived in security, every one under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, all the period of Solomon. Solomon also had stalls for 40,000 horses for his chariots, and 12,000 cavalry, and the governors provided these for King Solomon. Besides which they provided King Solomon's table each in his month. Nothing was omitted. They brought barley and straw for the horses and hunters to the places where they were, every one as instructed. And God gave to Solomon very great wisdom and understanding, and wide intelligence like the sand on the seashore. For Solomon's scientific knowledge was more extensive than the science of all the Beni Kedem, and than all the science of the Mitzrayim. He knew more than all men of the orbits of the planets, of the origination of light, and fixed sustaining systems, and the results of the revolving spheres, and his fame was spread among all the nations around. He also wrote 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. And he wrote about botany as well, from the cedar upon Lebanon to the mosses that grow upon walls, and studied the zoology of beasts, and birds, and reptiles, and fish, so that persons came from all the nations to listen to the sciences of Solomon, from all the kingdoms of the earth who heard of his scientific knowledge. Hiram, king of Zur, also sent his ministers to Solomon, when he heard that he had been consecrated king as his father's viceroy, for Hiram and David were friends all their time. Solomon accordingly sent to Hiram to say, You know David was not able to build a house to the name of the ever-living God, because the ever-living said to David my father, Your son, whom I will place as your viceroy on your throne, shall build a house to my name. So now therefore order them to cut for me cedars from Lebanon, and my workmen shall be with your workmen, and I will pay your workmen. I will pay you whatever you agree, for you know there are not among us men who understand the cutting of timber as the Zidonians do. And when Hiram heard the demands of Solomon, he was greatly pleased, and said, Thank the ever-living today, who has given David a wise son over this great people. So Hiram sent to Solomon to say, I have heard what you have communicated to me. I will do all that you wish in cedar and fir timber. My workmen shall bring it from Lebanon to the sea, and I will direct in rafts on the sea to whatever place you instruct me, and deliver it there, and you accept it and make payment to me by providing food for my people. Consequently Hiram supplied Solomon with cedar and pine timber as much as he desired, and Solomon paid to Hiram 20,000 cors of wheat to provide for his city, and 20 cors of olive oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. Thus the ever-living gave Solomon wisdom, as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and they both made a treaty together. King Solomon then levied a conscription from all Israel, and the conscription was 30,000 men, whom he sent to Lebanon by 10,000 a month, by monthly shifts. They were a month in Lebanon, 2 months at home, and Adoniram was over this conscription. He had also 20,000 carriers of loads, and 80,000 stone-cutters in the hills, besides Solomon's 30,000 masons, who were at the works in the plains, and 300 superintendents of the people laboring at the buildings. For the king ordered, and they made large stones, heavy stones for the foundations of the temple, polished stones. Thus the people of Solomon and the people of Hiram carved, and planned, and shaped the timber and the stones to build the temple. The end of chapters 1 through 5.